Hello, listeners. A very good day to all of you who have tuned in today to our show, Money and Me. I'm your host, Abhirab Bhattacharya, and boy oh boy, today we have got a really interesting episode for all of you. So, in the progress of our show, we have brought along a lot of crypto experts, a lot of CEOs of different crypto exchanges to talk about the future of cryptocurrencies. But we have also not forgotten the importance of blockchain technology that powers those crypto. And today's episode is perhaps the best way we can show the potential of blockchain and this story of a rising organization that's using blockchain tech to revolutionize the way we look at renewable energy sources. So please welcome in our show Dr. Jemma Green, the co-founder and chairman of Power Ledger. Hi, Jemma.
Hi, Abu. It's great to be on the show. Thanks for having me.
It's great having you, Jemma. There have been so many questions I've been wanting to ask you. I read up about Power Ledger and must say you guys are doing some tremendous work out there.
Thank you. We're very excited with what we've done in the first 5 years, but there's a lot more to do.
Right, right. So before I formally begin with the questions, if you could give us a small introduction about Power Ledger, then that would be great.
We're a software company. We use the blockchain to facilitate tracking and trading of electricity, trading of flexibility services, which stabilize the grid, and trading of environmental commodities related to electricity, so renewable energy certificates and carbon credits.
Right, right. All right. So the first question is a very important one because a lot of people understand how blockchain exactly fits into industries. So blockchain is basically a decentralized form of processing information. So tell us about how Power Ledger, being a blockchain-powered company, how it enables an energy and environmental commodity trading platform. And it just makes the entire market much more efficient. So just tell us about how you guys are making a difference in the energy industry.
I'll give you an example. We've just signed up a client in Australia with Carlton United Brewery, which is one of the largest beer makers here in Australia. And it's actually owned by a Japanese company now called Asahi. They are using our platform, buying rooftop solar from households peer-to-peer and paying them in cartons of beer delivered to their house. And there are many corporate brands that have sustainability commitments and also would like to engage with their customers more. And peer-to-peer trading like this, which we call loyalty peer-to-peer trading, or in this case, peer-to-beer trading, means that the solar effectively becomes a currency that can be traded for your favorite goods and services with your favorite brands. So it could be used for supermarkets, food and beverage outlets, your telcos that provide your internet and your phone could buy energy from you and pay you in store vouchers and credit. And using our platform, they can track and trade the energy, and any household can log in and see how much solar they have produced that's been sold to the brewery and how much beer that equates to.
So tell us, with this new concept of trading electricity, where does it leave the centralized electricity institutions?
Well, in the past 15 years, a lot of renewables has been installed in grids around the world, mainly driven by subsidy and feed-in tariff. And that's been okay to a point, but when you start to get high penetration of renewables in a system with centralized planning, like via a feed-in tariff, then you start to get renewables installed in the grid, not where it's needed and not when it's needed, and that causes big problems in the grid, causes issues with having to upgrade like poles and wires, which is very costly, grid stability issues, so issues with like voltage or reactive power, frequency issues. And our premise is that using a technology like the blockchain to create a marketplace for discrete price signals, so to encourage energy when and where it's needed, means that you'll have a more efficient system and be able to scale renewables without the headaches that we're seeing in places where it's being scaled using centralized planning and feed-in tariffs and subsidies. So the idea really is about growing renewables whilst keeping costs down, like keeping energy costs down, having a stable system, and also a low carbon system. Because even in places like Germany, where there's high penetration of renewables, 50%, the centralised planning around that has meant that the system is quite unstable, and so it needs a lot of energy from coal and gas to provide and supplement the system. So it's actually not doing so well on the carbon side of things, in spite of having more than 50% penetration of renewables in the system. Right. And so we think that if you actually put price signals in a localized sense and create local energy markets, you're not going to be building renewable generation assets across the country and then having to either store it and transport it with new systems that are additionally very costly.
Right. This brings me to my next question. So Power Leisure was recently announced as a founding partner of the Australia Zero Carbon Certification Scheme. So can you tell us about this scheme and how you believe it can help Australia move towards a carbon neutral future?
The scheme, which was created by Hydrogen Australia and the Smart Energy Council, has ambitions to create a certification scheme that can be used globally. And we've already seen the German energy agency DENA sign up to it, and several organisations in the US as well, looking for a way to validate the source or provenance of the hydrogen. Hydrogen is a element represented by H2. You can't tell in and of itself what was used to create the hydrogen. And so you need a tracking system that can trace the provenance of the source, because you could produce hydrogen from fossil fuels and that would be called brown hydrogen, or sometimes it's called grey hydrogen. But if you produce the hydrogen from renewables, it would be called green hydrogen. And you may actually be able to sell that at a premium, or there might be stronger demand for that, preferentially over brown hydrogen or grey hydrogen or blue hydrogen. But you need to be able to validate that it's actually green. So how do you do that? You need to be able to track where that hydrogen originated from. And we're working with, as a founding partner of the Zero Carbon Certification Scheme, and also with clients. Like we've got a client in South America that is producing offshore wind to make hydrogen and then exporting that to Germany to power electric vehicles. And they want it to know that it's green. If you think you're buying green hydrogen, but you find out that it's not, you're going to be pretty unhappy about that. So it's pretty important to be able to trust the claims that are being made about that hydrogen. And so having something that's on the blockchain that can validate the origins, where it was, the energy, where it came from, where it was moved from port to its final destination, is really important to be able to build the trust in the system and validate the claims. So we're very excited to be a part of this, and I think that we've seen this sort of tracking and tracing using the blockchain in applications or in sectors like for wine exports or olive oil, for example, wanting to know, perhaps that you bought Italian olive oil or French wine. But it equally applies to this particular use case with green hydrogen.
So since you're in the industry, tell us about the shift of perspective when it comes to renewables, because for the longest time, we've been using fossil fuels and a lot of the industry has gotten used to using it. Because if you look at it, it's cheaper to use it, right? Much more profits that way. So what's changing globally? What's causing this global revolution?
Well, renewables, when they first came out, were actually very expensive and required subsidies. And there was a lot of subsidization happening around the world to increase the uptake of renewables. But in 2015, the price of wind and solar actually fell below that of coal and gas. And it was heralded in the renewable sector as like a watershed moment. And people thought that the cost of energy overall would come down as a result of that. But if you centrally plan renewables, then what happens is you actually can drive up the cost. So if, for example, you close down a coal-fired power station and that is just outside of a city, you can't actually put enough solar or wind in that location to provide the same amount of energy. You need more space. And so you need to go further out. And if you put it further out, then you have to build transmission lines and distribution lines to bring it to the city, which adds cost and perhaps storage. Right. So that's through centralised planning. But if you can actually put quite a lot of renewables in closer to the city, the urban centre, you may not need to upgrade the poles and wires to bring that energy into the market. But to do that, you need a price signal to encourage it to be put closer to the point of consumption rather than further away. And that, I think, has been the next challenge. We've brought down the generation costs for solar and wind, and so they are now actually cheaper, but we need to actually integrate them into the system in a better way. And that's where we see locational and network, locational dynamic network pricing as a really important price signal to encourage the installation of renewables when and where they're needed. And in places like India, the federal government's made big targets around renewables, and they're hitting the large-scale renewable targets, but the smaller scale ones, they're behind. We're working with the state of Uttar Pradesh, which has it's the largest and most populous state in India and has about 90 million people living there. And we're also working with another state called Karnataka, which has, I think, about 64 million people living there. And they're looking at how do they encourage the growth of smaller scale renewables. And so they actually changed their regulations to allow blockchain-powered peer-to-peer electricity trading as a way to grow renewables in that part of the market as well as the large-scale part. And so I think that to your question about it's cheaper, it used to be cheaper, traditional energies, but it's not necessarily the case. But for renewables really to drive cost efficiencies, we need to move away from just centralised planning for it and into more distributed market paradigm.
So you believe Power Ledger can start a movement where global key industries can start shifting to renewables because of the decentralized network? Do you think then the industry adoption is going to come maybe in the next 5 to 10 years?
Yes. To your first question, so for example, in Thailand, we're working in Bangkok with a commercial peer-to-peer project that has 6 buildings in it at the moment. And BCPG, our partner, has installed rooftop solar on the buildings, and they're trading electricity peer-to-peer within the buildings. If they couldn't do that, they would be unlikely to have installed that much solar on the rooftops. So the ability to trade peer-to-peer is driving the installation of renewables. And so I absolutely think that it is going to define how the energy system is unfolding. And what we're seeing from a regulatory perspective is very strong reforms in places like Europe, for example, with the clean energy package, which is creating energy communities and peer-to-peer trading in the regulatory framework across all the EU member states. In the US, a rule change called FERC 2222, which is doing something very similar, where households can trade directly in the wholesale electricity markets across the US. And even in Australia, we're seeing that with what's called a two-sided market initiative that's intended to be rolled out by 2025. And so we're starting to see governments decentralising the way that electricity markets work in a similar way to what happened in 1996 with the telecommunications sector as a result of Bill Clinton's Telecommunications Deregulation Act, where the internet and media businesses suddenly many more players came and participated. Anyone that had a modem could set up and become an internet services provider, and there was lots of new entrants coming in and getting customers, and mergers and acquisitions associated with that. And I think that is very similar and analogous to what is happening in the electricity sector right now.
Right. So recently, the West Australian government stated that the state could generate a total of 100 gigawatts of new wind and solar capacity to produce green hydrogen by 2030. And it also said that it wants to double the capacity by 2040. So that's 200 gigawatts. Now, currently, Western Australia has a setup of 1 gigawatt of wind and solar capacity. So that's considerably less compared to what it's predicting to hit in 2030. So my question to you is, do you think it can achieve that goal?
I think it's absolutely attainable. The most of that solar and wind, or the solar particularly, is actually rooftop solar. Households in Western Australia having installed rooftop solar. But I think that ambition that you just mentioned relates to large-scale renewables in remote areas of Western Australia being used to produce hydrogen and also power the mining industry, which a lot of is powered by diesel right now. So it's really about displacing diesel and using a combination of solar, wind, and hydrogen to instead power that sector. It is going to require a lot of capital, but there's a lot of wealth that is created from the mining sector, and so I guess there is an ability to make those kinds of investments and reach those goals.
Right. Let's shift the conversation to you, Jemma, for the time being. So you started your career when you were 22 years old, and you started working in JP Morgan in London. And your work involved bringing sustainability and corporate social responsibility to big industries and companies. So did you even once think at that point that your entire career would be shifting towards global sustainability? And how did blockchain enter into your career?
Well, blockchain didn't enter into my career until I returned back to Australia after London. In terms of sustainability, that really only occurred to me, I think, around 2007, about 4 or 5 years after I had gotten to London and I'd been working in mainstream banking. I undertook a recycling project within JP Morgan's London offices, and the project was really fascinating because of the strong negative reaction that many people had to having to put their rubbish in a recycling bin. And I thought, this is way more interesting than my day job, and thought I'd like to work in this field, and went about doing some studies, some postgraduate certificates in sustainability and cross-sector partnership, and then a master's by research looking at sustainability. And whilst I was doing that, JP Morgan set up an environmental and social risk management unit to look at its lending and underwriting activities in high-risk environmental sectors. So mining, oil and gas, power, heavy manufacturing, carbon. And I was chosen to help work and set up that team and work there for quite some time. So it was a bit of an, I guess, unexpected set of circumstances, but really it came about by me being curious and pursuing, like, trying to find something else that I was more passionate about. And then I returned to Australia at the end of 2012 after I'd been in London for about 11 years. And then I did a PhD in electricity market disruption and designed a solar and battery system for an apartment building in Fremantle as applied research. And I was trying to find software that would create like a marketplace within the apartment, whereby each apartment would be allocated a portion of the output of the solar panels and the battery system. And if they didn't consume that allocation, they could trade it with their neighbours. That was what I wanted, but I couldn't find anything that did that. And by chance, a former banking colleague of mine in Sydney introduced me to John Bullich, my business partner, and he had been working in the blockchain for a number of years and saw many applications, had worked on many applications rather in the field, and we explored together the potential for it in electricity and saw some example projects around the world and thought, it can do what I had hoped in my PhD research project, but it has broader applications with electricity as well. And so a few months after that conversation, which was in January of 2016, we set up Power Ledger in May of 2016. So we just had our 5th birthday like a week ago.
Right. Congratulations on that.
Thank you.
So you were also the Deputy Lord Mayor of Perth, and you set up Australia's first fossil fuel free pension fund. So what was that like?
Well, I helped to set that up, and it was very exciting to see the demand for that kind of offering. People wanted to invest their long-term superannuation, money and funds into something that was actually building the energy system of the future and a low carbon future. And the fund grew to like in excess of $100 million during my time there, and has now grown orders of magnitude beyond that. So it shows very strong demand where people would like to, change the economy by how they invest their money. And in terms of the time I spent at local government, it was really around how to make a more livable city. And I lived in London for a long time, and I saw the urban regeneration that happened there, and particularly in the east part of London where I was living. And I think that Perth, where I am from and where Powerledger's main head office is based, really undersells itself as a city, and it's very well connected to many time zones across the world, and has nearly 300 days of sunshine every year and very high standard of living. And I think that when people think of where tech companies should be based in Australia, it's often over east or even not in Australia and overseas. And I was really, I went and lived in London for more than a decade because I thought that that's where I needed to go for, really good career opportunities. But my interest in Perth and was really about how to economically diversify the city so that there were many opportunities here. So my three children wouldn't have to go elsewhere to find those kinds of opportunities.
That's incredible. And what do you think about the decision? Do you think you're happy being here in Perth right now, making a change in your own country?
Well, in a sense, Powerledger building a tech company in Perth is not that usual. And, finding staff is harder because there's not a lot of other people working in similar sectors. But it's also really exciting for people to be able to move sectors and come and work for us. And I think you can see that even just since we've been operating Powerledger, there has been more activity in this space. So I think we will mature as a city and have more offerings like this for young people, for employment, and also just exporting our technology to other parts of the world. So Powerledger has more than 20 clients now in 9 countries, and those countries are choosing to buy their technology from Australia rather than maybe Silicon Valley or elsewhere. So yeah, I'm very excited and proud of what we've created and hope to do a lot more of it.
Right. Adding on to the blockchain angle, tokenization is something that's been becoming really trendy recently, even NFTs as well. Now, recently, renewable energy certificates have started being tokenized, and of course, the benefits are obvious because it's a simplified process, and people can't fraud their way out of it. So, tell us about why tokenizations of RECs might potentially be a game-changing move in the industry.
Well, renewable energy certificates, a certificate represents 1 megawatt hour of renewable power, and companies can buy those certificates to cover the amount of energy that they might have bought from traditional sources, to be able to legally and validly claim they're 100% renewable. And the certificate cannot be or should not be sold twice. And once they've purchased it, they should retire them after they've made a claim against it. So if they've used it to say we're 100% renewable this year, they can't use the certificate next year.
Right.
And more companies are starting to make these commitments about renewables. So the beer company I mentioned to you earlier, Carlton United Brewery, has committed to get to 100% renewable by 2025. And this is very common. There's a movement called the RE100s, renewable energy 100% basically is big multinationals and even just large companies are seeing that that's really important to their brand.
Right.
And if you buy certificates, you want to know that it's not a duplicate, that it hasn't been retired, that it's real as well, that it actually does measure a megawatt hour of renewable energy produced. Then there's a kind of another layer to that where some of the corporate leaders are wanting to actually match their rec buying against their load profile. So if they consumed energy in New York at 4:30 on a Thursday, they would like a certificate that was produced at in New York at 4:30 on a Tuesday or a Thursday, whatever the day is.
Right.
And so really what they're doing is sending a price signal to build renewables when and where they're needed in New York, as opposed to buying a certificate from, say, California to match against their New York consumption. And what that is actually doing, it's my 2-year-old being rather loud.
I can hear it.
Wow. Certificates are a commonly used way by corporates to do that, but buying them all around the world in different countries, that can be really tedious and painful and costly as well. And the contracting process can go on for a long time and be very expensive. And it will be more expensive perhaps than the value of some of the recs that are being purchased. So we think that having the ability to do that in a very efficient way is important for the maturation of the sector and to reduce costs. Renewables should be cheap and it should be easy to do. So the idea of tokenizing renewable energy certificates is really including within the certificate unique identifying characteristics about when it was generated, where it was generated. And in tokenizing it, it can't be duplicated and you can't have it be retired and sold at the same time. So it really adds a layer of security and trust to it. And having it on the blockchain means you can trade and settle it very efficiently between the buyer and seller. So you reduce the counterparty settlement risk where, I send them the certificate and then I don't get paid. On the blockchain, if you have settlement as a digital token as well, a stable coin, then you don't have any counterparty settlement risk. So there's quite a lot of exciting reasons to tokenize these kind of digital assets.
Right. Let's talk about one of the bigger global issues concerning blockchain and Bitcoin in particular. Bitcoin has been getting a lot of flack recently regarding its environmental concerns. However, a lot of reports have come out which state that Bitcoin uses a majority of renewable energy sources to mine it. Now, what is your take on that? Do you believe it?
Well, a lot of the Bitcoin that is mined is, powered by coal, but there's also quite a bit that's powered by hydro. Yeah. And so I think actually similar to what you're getting for hydrogen, you actually need a Bitcoin certification scheme to say, is my Bitcoin green or is my Bitcoin brown? And then it would eliminate the issues that we've seen where, people don't want to use Bitcoin because of the environmental concerns. So our platform, the Power Ledger platform, can readily be adapted to actually look at the origin of each Bitcoin and what was the energy source that was used to produce that. And I think that to the extent that people are going to be happy with buying or taking payments in Bitcoin, if it's green, I think that could actually create a point of difference with green Bitcoins versus all the other Bitcoins. But not all blockchains use a lot of energy. Yeah. And so that concern is not relevant to all parts of the blockchain sector. We actually use a proof of stake blockchain to record all of our transactions, and it uses no more electricity than a cloud service. So I think that you can't just make too many generalized statements about energy use in blockchains.
Right. So, Jemma, the last question for this interview is, I want to know your vision for 2040. Let's take it 2040. Let's put it well out there. How do you see the global scene regarding renewables and blockchain technology?
Well, I think that anyone will be able to, get onto the system, connect, trade their energy from their electric vehicle, charge it, make some money while they're at a restaurant by using their EV battery that covers their dinner costs, be paid instantly for all the grid services that they provide. I think we'll have largely like low cost, low carbon, stable energy systems, electricity for all, an electricity system that works for everyone, electrification in developing countries to improve standards of living. And yeah, I think that is something that so many people are working on and is imminently attainable and within our grasp.
So you think it's definitely possible, this optimistic take on a world where energy and currency, everything, everybody has access to all these resources. So you think it is definitely a possibility?
Absolutely. Yeah. I think that it's not, I'm not saying that it's a given that it will happen, but I think it's absolutely attainable. And I think that there are many people that are working on this problem and or this opportunity. And I think it's absolutely within our grasp.
Right. Any closing comments, Jemma, before we wrap this interview up?
Well, that shift that you just pointed to is a paradigm shift. And to understand that, it's not just a matter of, closing down a coal-fired power station and sticking in some solar panels. It is a wholesale change to the way energy is planned, and a wholesale plan change to the way it's traded and tracked and settled. And so it is a root and branch change that needs to happen. And I think part of that is really people comprehending that it is a paradigm shift, and that I think many people, even in the renewable sector, just think it's a bit like cocoa beans, but it's not the same. There are many different aspects to it, and it is a complex sector. So I think it's great that, I just want to say thanks for the opportunity to talk about that part of renewable energy, because I think it's important for people to understand that aspect of it and to then work to kind of creating it and living into it.
So if I may add on to what you said, I think it's really exciting to see you folks actually. So a lot of people speak about, going green, about using renewables, but then, like you said, it's not just shifting from coal to solar. It doesn't work that way. It's an entire shift of mindset. It's implementing new technology. It redefines the way we look around us. And yeah, I think this session really brought a lot of clarity to me. And I'm sure it's going to bring a lot of clarity to our viewers as well. So thank you so much, Gemma, for coming over here and sharing your thoughts with us.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.